Right, good evening to everybody, and thank you. This is a Corporate Services Scrutiny Board. I'd just like to thank everybody for attending. We'll go straight into it. Do we have any apologies?
We have apologies from Simon Riley, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's no late items to be introduced. Have you got any, Simon? Sorry, Dominic?
No late items, thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Any declarations of interests? Non-recorded, thank you very much. Item 4, minutes of the meeting held on 1st of October 2020. I've been through the minutes as accurate. I'd like to move them. Can I have a seconder, please?
I'll second them, Chair. Councillor Stanton.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stanton. Okay. Right, item 5, Strategic Partnership and Vision Commission update. Heather, good evening to you.
Good evening. Hi. Yeah, I'm going to give an update around the just where we are in terms of the strategic partnership and also the Vision Commission. Members may remember we came to the Scrutiny Board, I think it was around March last year. So at that point, we had just taken a report through to Council Cabinet that talked about the kind of the re-energising of the city's partnership, and also our intention to carry out a Vision Commission. So really look at the future of the city. Now that was obviously just immediately before COVID. So what we felt was it was obviously really pertinent to just give you the kind of the updated position, because actually there's been an awful lot of work in between. So Dominic, if we can just move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So since that update in March, obviously over the last I was going to say 9 months, there has been an absolutely tremendous response through our partnerships and our communities to COVID-19, and that has been our primary focus. There is no doubt about it. So what we did was we paused the work on the Vision Commission, and I will come on to that because planning has continued in the background. But obviously we have paused our work just because we felt that the short-term priority around COVID was obviously the most important. We did, however, launch our City Partnership Board, and that's, I think, a really positive development that, again, I will come on to talk about. But I think it's just worth recognising that, you know, there is no doubt that the city response around COVID has been phenomenal. And what we want to do through our wider partnership working and through the vision in due course is really build on that. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, we want to work in partnership, and actually over the last 9 months, what we have done in terms of our launch of the City Partnership Board is kind of reevaluate the principles with which we want to work. So it is through collaboration. It is through, you know, with pace, as we have seen through the COVID period, we've had to move quickly. It is with creativity, and it's certainly putting the community first. I'm going to come on to talk about the city's draft recovery plan that is currently out to consultation, and that is, you know, driving, I think, our focus around outcomes, because I think a lot of what the council is doing and working with its partners is shifting towards those really important outcomes that we want to see, you know, kind of, you know, collectively working towards that with the city. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the City Partnership Board. So I think within the covering report that's been attached for committee, we have listed all the, there are a number of outcome boards that are currently in place. So whether that be the Health and Wellbeing Board, Children, Family and Learners Board, Derby Renaissance Board. I think there's around 6 outcome boards in total. The City Partnership Board, or Leadership Board as it used to be known, hadn't met for a couple of years. So what we felt was that in terms of taking the vision work forward, we felt the leadership board was going to be quite important to be able to kind of assemble that kind of collective will around actually where we wanted to go as a city. If I'm being honest, it's become even more important in terms of COVID. But obviously that was our intention pre-COVID to kind of re-energise the City Partnership Board, and we have done that even despite COVID. So actually, I think the first meeting was held back in June. We have met monthly. It's composed of a kind of a fairly broad representation of the City Partnership. So it does contain group leaders. It is chaired by Councillor Chris Poulter in his role as leader of the council. It contains the chairs of the outcome boards, as I've mentioned. It also has a number of public sector bodies represented. So, for example, Derby University, the Clinical Commissioning Group, for example, Department of Work and Pensions, Environment Agency. So again, we've got kind of all of the key sort of agencies that impact in the city. We also have business representation from Toyota, from Rolls-Royce. We're also looking at the kind of the chair of the Derby Renaissance Board once that's filled, and also from the community. So for example, we have Kim Harper from Community Action Derby. We also have Bishop Libby Lane from the Diocese of Derby. The format is, it does meet monthly. It is virtual as it stands. We've not been able to physically meet, as you can imagine. The agenda is really dynamic. We feel that that's kind of been the I guess the kind of the best way to handle what we're currently looking at. Although we have presented updates on things like the Vision Commission, the Recovery Plan. Dominic, if we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So things that we have looked at as part of that dynamic agenda, it has been focused around recovery. So from an economic recovery point of view, we've looked at options around our city centre reinvention, and also things like youth unemployment. So obviously through COVID we have seen rising benefit claimants. We know that that there have been a number of redundancies announced in the city, and we know that there is an impact on our younger population. So again, we've been looking at kind of what the data says, and determining interventions as a result through our economic recovery steering group. From a community recovery point of view, again, a really important part in terms of trying to build on the momentum that we've seen through initiatives such as the Community Hub. So Rachel North and Kim Harper from Community Action Derby gave us an update on the Better Together initiative, which is kind of how we take that forward, and also we've had updates on things like the poverty on the development around a poverty commission to really explore kind of the causes of poverty that we are seeing in light of COVID, and to develop some interventions as a result. So you can see that I think what's being considered is really topical, and it's informed the development of the recovery plan that has recently gone out to consultation. So if we move on to the next slide, you can see, just in summary, what the Derby Recovery Plan is proposing to focus on. So it is kind of focusing on the three strands. So our place, that kind of economic recovery. So it's based on building confidence, diversifying our economy, and also decarbonising the city. From our people point of view, so the community recovery aspect, it is about healthy citizens, so whether that be in terms of tackling COVID itself or some of the underlying health inequalities. It's about resilient neighbourhoods through our Better Together initiative, and it's also about keeping the most vulnerable safe through thriving children, young people and families. And then finally, I think there is also an organisational aspect to our recovery, and actually the council has articulated that, but I know that wider partners across the city are doing that. And so again, the outcomes that we're focusing on there are around enabling our residents, building on digital opportunities, but obviously incorporating those opportunities to support those that are digitally excluded, being as intelligence-led as we can, so using data in a more focused way, and also empowering our colleagues. There's loads of opportunities in terms of ways of working that we in a way that COVID has exposed, and we want to take those forward. So the draft recovery plan was presented to Council Cabinet in December, alongside the medium-term financial plan. We did a kind of a short briefing to all members back at the members briefing we did in December, but I would encourage members of Corporate Services Scrutiny Board to please, to obviously have a look at the papers that are out and feedback, because we are, we're keen to, hear, I think, what people think and where there are particular gaps that we need to address going forward. There's no doubt the recovery plan will be dynamic. It needs to be. We don't know yet what are the, the full impacts of COVID, and I think they will continue to, emerge. So it's something that we want to kind of develop over the next 12 to 15 months. Next slide, please. So the recovery plan, I think, addresses our short to medium term improvement as a city and how we focus and how we recover from COVID. We haven't lost sight of the longer term, which is what we'd intended to do through our Vision Commission. It is to take that longer term perspective, possibly, take the city in 30 years' time in 2050. What do we, how do we see our city, and how can we build that positive, vision for the future, and draw the areas of focus forward and kind of galvanise all our partners and communities behind that. So what we have done over the last 9 months is we found a chair for the commission. So Bishop Libby Lane is delighted to be chairing the Vision Commission. We have continued to work to find Vision Commissioners who can join the Commission. I mean, what we are looking to do is agree some priority themes to enable them to undertake some research and consultation with our community to really review the data, review the, both qualitative and quantitative, just consider all of the evidence. It's to be honest, even more important now, I think, in light of COVID. The future actually looks quite different now. So I think the opportunity to be able to have a look at that long-term picture is really important, and obviously that's what we wanted the Vision Commission to do. We do feel that engagement is key. Obviously our Vision Commissioners will act as experts, but really, we do need to reflect, what partners, what our communities, what our residents, what our businesses, what everybody actually thinks is the future of Derby. So if we move to the next slide, please. We'd considered doing various bits of engagement, if I'm being honest, and that had been in the plan. It has not felt appropriate to do that engagement given COVID, because from a communication point of view, it has been more important to get messages out about doing the right thing for Derby, following the rules, social distancing, all of that sort of stuff. There has been an awful lot to communicate out, as you can imagine. So the engagement that we have, I think that we had planned, I think can still take place in due course when the time is right. In the meantime, what we have done is focused on well-being. Because it has been a tough 9-10 months, and the way that we are doing that is actually through the Brilliant Derby initiative. So working with Dr. Andy Cope, who wrote The Art of Being Brilliant, and doing some web-based sessions to really, I think, focus on some of the positives that actually we can build even in such difficult times as this, and it will focus on personal and collective resilience. We're actually going to launch it next Monday, which is known as Blue Monday. So it's the Monday after Christmas when everybody realises they get their credit card bills and they start to feel even more depressed. So we feel we've done quite a lot of media coverage of this. There's some really positive stories, but essentially it will be some web-based sessions, and we will be encouraging partners and residents to participate in that. We hope that will start the dialogue for the engagement that we can build on in terms of taking that forward. So next slide, which I think is my final slide. Yep. So just in terms of next steps, we want to continue to develop and implement the recovery priorities. We want to do that through our partnership partnership board, and also review the kind of boards and working groups that sit underneath that. I think what we have done is we have added to the number of boards and working groups through our recovery groups that we have put in place, and I think there is scope to rationalise and just actually kind of focus, in terms of our new priorities that are emerging from a recovery point of view. We'll continue with the engagement, and we will finalise our proposals around the Vision Commissioners, and when we feel it is the time is right, I think probably later in the year, we will obviously commission the research and really kick off the Vision Commission in due course, at which point I think it's probably appropriate to come back to corporate services scrutiny, just so we keep you up to date and you can input as part of the process. So that was everything that I wanted to say. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Right, thank you very much for that, Heather. I did attend a consultation event this afternoon as well on that briefing, so thanks for that. Can I open it up to members? Any questions you've got for Heather?
I've got a couple of questions, Chair.
Yes, Councillor Stanton.
Thank you. Heather, I know partnership working, we had I think it was an LGA review of the council a couple of years ago, and we got really slammed on this of how poor we were at partnership working in Derby. And so this is obviously a really welcome report and welcome piece of work that's happening. Just a few things that I think might be missing and may just be missing from the report and maybe happening and just didn't highlight in the report is what's our level of engagement with other types of partners? So, for instance, third sector partners or business groups like the Cathedral Quarter, though they weren't really called out as much as the big employers. And then also groups like, Marketing Derby. I think sometimes is, and also some cultural partners that we may have in the city, whether that's Quad, Data, Derby Theatre, just ensure, I think that we just need quite a holistic approach to some of this stuff, and sometimes some of those groups get left out in the cold a little bit, and so it'd be good to understand where they feature in this, if they have been considered, or what their role is. And secondly, so that's the question one, just around that. Question two was just whether you mentioned the MTFP, and I was just wondering whether the MTFP does actually support the in what way the MTFP is sort of. Can you point to anything within it that supports these sort of this vision and these strategies that we've talked about, that you've highlighted, and how it's doing that? And lastly, I guess, which is linked to that, is I've seen the recovery plan, and it's got some really good from a vision standpoint, but it is all quite well, it's healthy citizens, confidence, diversity, a lot of great buzzwords, but I'm just wondering whether we have drilled it down to some key sort of measures of success, and at what point in the evolution of this plan that we're planning on solidifying those and actually probably sharing them with our partners and maybe more widely, and are we there yet, or what's the process, where are we on the process for actually sort of saying it looks like this, what does healthy citizens actually look like when we're going to achieve it, when will we know what success looks like? So that's the three questions, Heather. Thank you.
Okay, very good questions, thank you. In terms of your first question around partnership engagement, I would say there is good partnership engagement. Excuse me, from the kind of the sectors that you mentioned. So, for example, third sector. The third sector, we have got a strong board. So that's where I think they're a really active, stronger board actually. So I think there's some really excellent representation of community partners as part of that. I would also say we have a community recovery board. And again, where I think we have engaged those partners really well as part of that. I mean, I think COVID generally has really, I think encouraged much greater collaboration across the city. And again, what we want to do is take that forward. From an economic point of view, obviously the bids, Marketing Derby, they are involved in. First of all, the Derby Renaissance Board, which is the kind of the outcome board that's been in place for a long time, but also the Economic Steering Group, which has been really trying to take forward some of the emerging impacts that we've seen from COVID. So again, I would say there's good engagement from them, because the steering group is meeting really regularly and includes them. From a cultural partners point of view, there is a Leisure, Culture and Tourism Board. So again, very active. And they contribute to, for example, to be honest, all of those contribute towards the partnership board. But what I would say is that we are undertaking a mapping exercise of all of the partnership activity to try and, I think, help us review actually what we need to go forward, because there's no doubt, I think there's lots of opportunities to engage, but it's about focusing around the recovery priorities and delivery of those going forward. So I think, whilst there's lots of boards and working groups, I think it's important that we review those, evaluate them, and actually work out what we need to going forward that can kind of underpin the work of the partnership board. I would also mention, actually, I haven't said, but there's obviously statutory boards as well that are obviously continuing to meet. So whether that be the kind of community safety partnership or the safeguarding boards. So again, as part of the mapping exercise that we're doing, we're reflecting those as well. So hopefully that answers the first question. In terms of the second question, the recovery plan, I mean, one of the reasons we have, I guess, for the timing of issuing the draft recovery plan was at the same time as the budget and the medium-term financial plan, because we wanted to make it clear how integrated they are. So, I mean, particularly our capital programme, that some of the sort of the priorities that are included in the recovery plan are obviously reflected in the capital programme, and also from an organisation recovery, we are looking at opportunities, through our medium-term financial plan to help us, I think, transform the organisation as we go forward. So I think if you look at the detail of what's contained within the medium-term financial plan, you will see very good alignment with where we're going with the recovery plan. And I think the last one was around just outcomes. I mentioned that's obviously one of the, I think as we go forward, that the shift towards outcomes is really critical to us actually making a difference. And there's no doubt we need clear actions, we need clear accountabilities, and we need clear metrics. And me with my performance hat on, underpinning the recovery plan, what we are looking to do over the next couple of months is develop outcome plans. So that is in working in conjunction with partners, but agreeing what those kind of high level actions and performance measures will be, so that we can track those over the next 12 to 15 months. So I'm hope the intention is to get those in place by the end of March.
Perfect. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you. Cheers.
Very good. Thank you very much for that. Anybody else to make a contribution? Councillor Pegg?
Everything's okay, thank you.
Councillor Noaz?
Everything's okay.
Okay, good, thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks for that.
No problem. Councillor McChrystal?
No, thank you for the presentation, Heather.
Okay, Heather, just a few from me. The City Partnership Board, you say it's only just starting to function again. I mean, the way I see it, I thought this was one of our most strategic boards that we had, that had representation from all of the partners. I think we're still operating the city partnerships as well. And is that only just still got going now?
Yeah, it started again in June.
Right.
We've been meeting monthly since June.
Yeah.
But I think, as Councillor Stanton referred to, it was one of the things that got picked up in the Council's Corporate Peer Challenge a couple of years ago. And so it was something that we've had in mind to be, to be re-establishing, and obviously we have done that. And actually, I think it's going really well.
No, good. I mean, I was involved with Derby in 2008 as a cabinet member and stuff like that, and it worked well, and everybody was, sort of communicating with each other. So I was quite surprised that it sort of dwindled along the way, but I'm glad to see it up and going again. That's good. Right. Some of the things that we're looking on that recovery plan, I did mention this afternoon, but I'll mention it again. Can you elaborate a bit more on the poverty element of the recovery plan? Because the way I'm looking at this is that I suppose this is a bit of consultation going in. What we're not very good at doing is working with communities, different communities, the city council itself. For example, I'm a trustee at our temple, St Thomas's Road. We get a lot of older people, younger people in there, and obviously we're sort of very limited as to what we're doing now, but the people that have been sort of passing through, very few in numbers, you can see all the pressures that they're having as communities. And I'm working with Hadari Nari or West Indian Community Centre. I think some of those groups that we call hard to reach, whilst they're doing what they can for the communities, as a council, I think we should be doing a little bit more. and I think that was part of the feedback, to the recovery plan.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think that was recognised by the partnership board, and obviously features in the recovery plan because it is a priority. So certainly in the autumn, the commitment was made to set up the Poverty Commission. It is community led. I think the Dean of Derby Cathedral is the chair. And I must admit, I don't know a lot of detail about it, but I can certainly find out more information for you. But certainly, I think the intention was the Poverty Commission was going to meet to look at the underlying causes of poverty, to try and work out actually what are the best interventions that we collaboratively can make as a partnership to support that going forward. And I think there was a fairly quick response expected. I don't think this was going to take years. I think the idea was to try and bring something back in the spring.
So the other thing, I mean, obviously, as part of the recovery plan, we should be looking at the social side of things for communities, and certainly one of the things that crops up all the time is the homelessness element of it. Again, I just happened to walk down St. Peter's Street a few days back, and it was full with people. That were homeless walking around with sleeping bags. I mean, under the current climate, we need to be having a look at the long-term plan for people, homelessness and so on. We've taken a lot of food to Padley, and everybody else, councillors included, and working with the hub are doing a wonderful job.
Yeah.
But I think we really need to look at the social side of things as well. To have a look where we're not doing things too well, which we're looking at, I take which we're doing as well, one of these terms. But yeah, that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. I think your comments are noted, and particularly, I mean, I do think the Stronger Board and the Community Recovery Group are very much taking those issues forward, Councillor Nater.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that, Heather.
Thank you.
If you're not on again, you're free to go.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Right, item 6, COVID-19 impact on car parking. Who's taking that one on board, Dominic?
And that's me, Chair.
Right.
Sorry, so I'm here, and my colleague, my head of traffic and transport, Nigel Bryan, is here too. But we'll do our best to do a double act for you. I'll take you through the presentation, which is very short and sweet, and obviously Nigel will answer your difficult questions. I think that's how it works. Are you all right with sharing? Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Dom. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting us here to the Corporate Services Scrutiny Board, Chair, to talk about parking in Derby, and particularly, I think, the impact on the demand that we've seen due to COVID. If you could go on this next slide, please, Dom. So management of parking, as you all know, is essential for all those sort of systems and the ways that our city functions that we generally take for granted day to day. It's about how we manage our place and the spaces between them to ensure that smooth flow of people, vehicles, etc. on the highway. And I guess if I'm thinking about parking from a pure point, then actually you could say that all parking is obstruction to that aim of getting that smooth flow. So I guess for me, it's important to say that this isn't just about, it's not just that we have a space and we charge for it or we don't. I do think there's a real subtlety to the art of parking. It's certainly something I've learned in this job. And so what we're seeking to achieve all the time is that circulation and turnover, that movement. And so when we do restrict, whether that's waiting, drop off, etc., and there's a large range of the things that we do, all we're trying to do is regulate for the best circumstances on that particular patch. So that's what we're trying to achieve all the time. So parking services are a small team within traffic and transport, as you know, and probably all have had dealings with from time to time. And two main areas: on-street parking, so where you're parking along the street, and you may have that as a pre-parked meter, or you'll get a ticket in a car park. We have resident parking schemes, which are obviously very popular with key areas where neighbourhoods come together to decide that they want to do that. And then we have off-street parking. So the council operates 14 different car parks, and obviously the 3 big multi-storey car parks, Chapel Street, Bold Lane and the Assembly Rooms that we're all aware of. And again, going back to that key aim is to help the city operate as smoothly as possible, providing these locations and then managing that parking restrictions appropriately. And yes, we charge for some of those spaces. And again, the reasons why we do decide to charge or not, because we don't always, it's about regulation in that best circumstances, encouraging the turnover of spaces and keeping the circulation and free flow. So yes, we do charge for some, but that means we can reinvest in parking and transport schemes. And one particular innovation, again, which has been really successful as it's rolled out across the last few years, is the My Permit and the move towards cashless parking, and the way we've used it for resident permits as well. It's allowed us to be so much more flexible and so much more customer focused in what we're trying to achieve. And the parking team are definitely a team that are always pushing the service forward. They've won several international awards, particularly again for that use of new technology. And something like My Permit and that flexibility, I think for me, when we used it so positively to help manage visitors to the Waste and Recycling Centre on Rainsway when we reopened after the first COVID lockdown, really goes to show what a flexible and helpful tool it is. So next slide, please, Dom. So what about COVID? Well, since March 2020, all the lockdowns and the various restrictions that have been put in place nationally to control the virus have absolutely changed the choices people make about parking in Derby. And these are some of the most significant reasons why people have made different choices, really. Firstly, and most importantly, we're staying at home and quite simply not using our cars. And that's had a massive impact. Then there's the reduction in commuting. We're not going to work, we're staying at home, we're home working, we're doing it here. So that's had a big impact. Then there's the reduction in the numbers and the length of stay of visitors and business travellers, particularly in the city centre. And of course, allied to that is the restriction and closures of retail, hospitality businesses and cultural organisation and events, hotels, etc. They're not open, people aren't coming in, particularly again in the city centre. People are generally using those facilities in local ways. There has been a reduction in public transport generally, huge reductions in the number of people using buses and rail travel in particular. And I guess you could say that could have a positive impact on parking in Derby and the decisions people make. But I think in the scale of everything else, it's quite small. And I guess lastly, I'd indicate the sort of redundancies that we've had in our major employers and some of their supply chains. So all those factors have meant a very significant reduction in use of both on and off-street parking facilities. And as well as that, the demand for those season tickets that we do or contracts with businesses where we provide parking for their employees. So the hard cold figures, if we can go to the next slide, are here for you, and they're quite stark, as you can see. So what we've put here is we've split up the on-street and off-street parking together, the season ticket income, and then obviously the compliance, the penalty charges that we get. And obviously from that's a great, because we are achieving greater compliance because people aren't parking, I suppose you could say, on one level. But as you can see, projected to year end, we're looking at nigh on 50% reductions across the board. It's very significant, and that isn't unique to Derby. All councils are grappling with this, as well as many privately run car parks. So it's nothing new. We understand what's happening here. But if you could go to the next slide, I guess what you want to know is what we do about it. So sort of three main things really. Firstly is immediate support from government. So they have provided some help to local government for the impact of the virus, and that's a one-off compensation payment, and it's for irrevocable, get my teeth in, and unavoidable losses from sales, fees and charges. And the key thing is that scheme includes a 5% deductible rate, and as we understand it, it is a one-off. We're not anticipating it to repeat next year, but clearly this is going to mitigate some of the financial pressures that you've just seen. For this team internally, what we're looking at is, we've got to respond to this financial pressure. This is a drop in demand. We've got to be pragmatic and be flexible and adapt to this different change. And we know that, the demand has gone down. We don't know exactly when things will turn up again, when that's going to make a big difference. So as part of our budget planning, we're going to review off-street parking strategy and have a look at the car parks that we have, and particularly the use of multi-storey car parks, where we have a number of ageing buildings. And we have management arrangements in place, so we want to have a look if we can do the things differently there. And again, particularly going back to that development of technology, the increasing use of cashless payments and possibly other opportunities through the My Permit system and what we might be able to do. But ultimately, it very much links back to Heather's presentation about the vision and where we're moving forward as a city in the recovery, because, while we acknowledge that uncertain context, then we work with our partners on our recovery plan. And we have very strong themes, as you've seen, around the vibrancy of the city centre. And for me, that's the biggest thing that's going to have the impact on parking long term, that people want to choose to come into the city and to stay. And it's really as simple as that. So just on to the last slide. Again, this just highlights the use of technology, the more flexible ways that we can do this, the more customer focused we can make this, the better it is for us as a city, and the better it is for the people and the residents and the visitors who come here. So that's all I wanted to say in the presentation, but I'm sure you'll have questions. So open the floor.
Interesting topic.
Yes.
Yes, it is. Like I said, let me open it up to the members first, and I'll come in afterwards. Anybody got any?
I've got some questions, Chair.
Yes, go for it.
So I've just done some quick maths. I don't know. After you may be able to answer this. After the grant that we expect to be one-off, is what's the actual pressure? What's the shortfall there? And how much of that do we think is going to be solved by the easing of lockdown, and how much of that is going to be more of a sort of systemic change to the way we work, to the way we interact? I know people are taking less public transport, which could push people back into their cars, but fundamentally is a lot of the office and retail employment and footfall that we get in the city centre may not come back. There has to be an estimation of that. So how much is the pressure now, given the grant, and how much of that pressure do we expect to be ongoing in terms of the future income we can expect from our parking? And to that, I'm just wondering how much of the parking income we get, and over various years, I think the amount of money we make from parking sort of supplements most of the council budget actually, and really does, it's a real cash cow that sometimes actually we do get criticised for. But how much of that is redirected into promoting sustainable travel in the city? And is there an opportunity, I guess, that whilst we have this low level of traffic in the city, or lower level of traffic in the city, of actually making some more fundamental changes to whether that is the amount of parking we offer or the amount of pedestrian spaces, that sort of thing. And I guess that sort of feeds into that wider city vision in terms of, if we are going to want this sort of green, pleasant place to live, I think the vision of cities is changing somewhat. And if you want people to live in cities, you certainly don't want them living next to main roads or busy roads. That's where people don't want to live. And therefore, is there an opportunity here to actually use this to cut the amount of parking we offer in the city? And that's it, Chair. And lastly, just not a question, just a comment. I think the My Permit scheme, I use it both as a resident parking, but also for on-street parking. And I think it's brilliant. I think it's been an absolute revolution in terms of the ease with which you can pay for your parking, how you can manage visitors, how you can add extra parking to your car if you're, still having a coffee and having a second one or whatever it might be. So really, fantastic piece of tech there.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with you. I think that your first question is in some ways a difficult one to answer, because obviously at the moment we're still projecting that year end. We don't know exactly what it will be. And I think, and Alison will correct me if I'm wrong, I think we've probably claimed for about, it's just over 2 million, I think, so far. And we are obviously, you know, working with our finance colleagues all the time, and we'll be building in, you know, we'll be changing the budget base to reflect this reduction in demand as we go forward into next year. So I don't think I can put an exact figure on what that final, the difference between how much we get back from the national government and the gap, but clearly there will be a gap. And I think because it's so uncertain as when that recovery will start to happen, because again, people will come into the city centre if the offer's right, if they want to be here. So you know, we're playing with unknowns all the time, and I think it's just going to be a difficult thing to absolutely pin down, and certainly some of those technological changes and the work of the team will bridge some of that gap, but hopefully, as I say, the work of the city centre, some of the things that you know, when we see that vibrancy coming back, the work they would do, you know, Stella's doing around the work of the city centre, the marketplace, etc. As soon as we can get that back, but I think it's going to be a while. I think it's going to be a while before people come back to it. So I'm imagining this impact certainly across the first few quarters of next year and into quite a bit of the year ahead. I don't know if Nigel, if you've got anything to add.
Yeah, just picking up on on some of the other points. Sorry, I had a little tech blip there. I think the interesting thing around the systemic changes is you're right, we don't know. I mean, this is something we've not gone through before, but people will go to places where there's something to go to. It is all about the power of the offer. It's about that vibrancy ticket, and parking per se is something that on its own, you know, playing with pricing of parking and stuff has very little influence on people's visitor and travel behaviour, to some, you know, particularly visitor behaviour. It's about, you know, people going to places where there's something to go to. So we see, for example, price elasticity in parking is incredibly flexible. So, you know, traditionally somewhere like York, you park near the city walls in York before COVID, it would be £10 to £15 for a 4-hour stay, and they would have 90% occupancy. So it's about, you know, the power of place, and we can see the same impact locally with into pre-COVID had some of the most expensive parking charges in the city, and their weekend occupancy would be 85% plus. So, you know, it's about convenience, it's about where people want to go to. So recovery is very much absolutely, in terms of parking, driven by what the city centre's got to offer. I think it's quite interesting in terms of the point that Councillor Stanton makes about the public transport behaviour and will everybody drive when things are open. And actually what we've seen, and this is quite reassuring, is quite a strong public transport bounce back in Derby. That during the first lockdown we had very, very low percentage figures, and understandably it was a very constrained lockdown, and some routes were falling to 5%, 10% of their pre-COVID levels, daily levels of patronage. When that lockdown eased, levels went back up to 45% pretty quickly, particularly in the peak time periods. And those levels grew up until the November restrictions. And even at the November restrictions, they still only dropped to about 50%. The disappointing thing is, from a whole city vibrancy point of view, is those are commuter trips. So the buses that are running commuters and that are running essential workers and shift workers are at those kind of 55, 60% levels outside of lockdown. And they seem to be fairly resilient. But the midday trips and the weekend trips are absolutely, you know, there's lots of empty buses. We've all seen empty buses running around the city. And so for workers, public transport is working. But for discretionary travel, people are staying local. They're not coming to the city centre. You know, maybe there's not enough things open, maybe too many things have closed down, but there's not enough there. So people are, you know, staying local, shopping local. The good bit about that is that it does show a pattern of lockdown, post-lockdown, restriction, post-restriction, lockdown, etc. And we see this bounce back in public transport. It's not quite as devastating as people like to tell it. And I don't particularly think that, looking at the patterns in other cities that are quite similar, that we're going to see a massive switch to private car use if and when we get back to something that's more normal. I think we'll get more of a regression to, you know, 15% of people on public transport, of total commuting on public transport, the same kind of block in private car and the same kind of block in active travel, which I think leads us on to the point about whether there's an opportunity in terms of active travel. And I think there are some opportunities, but we have to be realistic about the propensity to travel by walking and cycling declines, you know, for every kilometre of that trip. And it's also about the spatial arrangement of where people live, where people work, where people's leisure time is spent, where their kids go to school, that sort of stuff. So those sort of combined trips that mean that active travel is not suitable for everybody. But definitely with some of the shorter local journeys, some of the journeys that are made around the university, there's definitely some angles there which we're trying to bring forward as part of Transforming Cities programme by working on different infrastructure, as Councillor Stanton has alluded to. We've got the Active Travel Fund, which government, originally it was emergency active travel, now it's just active travel. And we're going to be looking at work around schools, because that's another key trip generator where a lot of the journeys are short journeys. So there's all of that sort of thing around in the ether. In terms of money spent on active travel from parking, it goes into any surplus goes into the highways pot. Fundamentally, we're not really allowed to make a surplus, particularly from on-street parking. That's definitive in the legislation. We are not allowed to make a surplus. We can't do it at a profit. We can't put on-street parking charges in place to make money. We do it to regulate parking for the benefit of road users, to, as Werner said, create turnover or provide specific spaces. And we do that in other areas without charges through restrictions, waiting limits, etc. But the money goes back into the highways budget. So there's quite a bit spent on resurfacing activities, on road safety schemes, supplementing the capital programme. The money spent on equipment, etc. as well. But we also plough quite a bit back into parking for some of these innovation changes, which we're seeing now are actually having cost benefit. We've been able to reduce cash collection and some of our other contract costs whilst delivering My Permit, which is basically a very flexible product, which is as many solutions as there are customers, and we're able to put out certain offers, links to events, etc., do some direct marketing. It's great for season tickets. We're able to sort of make people introductory offers on season tickets and then introduce them to a longer term relationship with us. So I think that's sort of, sorry, a very long answer, but there was quite a lot in the question and quite a lot of detail buried in there.
That's really good. No, that's really useful. Just one follow-up, and the My Permit. What level of autonomy do we have to adapt that as a product? I mean, if I've got some ideas, and I know that it's mainly just tweaks I want make to my own app, but
well, it fundamentally it's not our product. It's owned by a third party, but our relationship with them is absolutely fantastic. And in many ways, we are their trial authority. So Werner mentioned, you know, we asked, can we do something that manages the household waste site in terms of how much capacity is for throughput? So, you know, basically a booking system that recognises the total capacity of throughput through there. So we don't invite more people than can actually service, so we don't have queuing, we don't have frustration, etc. And you probably saw at the time there were lots of authorities opened their sites and the police were shutting them, saying that this is not safe. You know, this is not safe in COVID terms, not safe in road safety terms. So we took that approach. And we approached My Permit, and they were fantastic and worked with us to adapt the product very, very quickly. Within 10 days of our initial request, the team at My Permit had that ready to go, and a web portal ready to go as well. And now the whole of Wales will be using it from the end of February. The whole of Wales will be using that system. So we generate some ideas for them, which then they then market. They love working with us. They won an award, believe it or not, an International Technology Award that was given out in Thailand, September, October last year. And we were part of their nomination package. And it's fantastic to be involved in that sort of stuff. So if you've got ideas, there is flexibility for us to work with them. They are very much a partner of ours.
I'll drop you an email then, Nigel.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thanks for all those responses. Brilliant.
Thank you for that. Councillor Pegg?
No, nothing at the moment, thank you.
Right. Councillor Nawaz?
Yeah, I've got a few questions. I live on a residence-only street, and the thing is, it's not, the My Permits. When you got to renew it, like Jack says, Jack likes it, I like it, but the old pensioners don't like using the My Permit, and they've got no other choice. And, we've got to give flexibility. All right, I like it, Jack likes it, fine. But what about the pensioners who are living? It's making it hard for them.
We do have this, Councillor, where we occasionally get people who don't or won't use the technology or aren't comfortable. If they contact the team, I would tell you from direct experience, the team will not only deal with their application, but they will actually deliver the permits to them. We are obviously encouraging people to move away from paper, but if they can't or won't, or they're not comfortable, then we've got so few people using paper permits now. We do a bespoke to the door service.
Is that just through the this Corona, or will you do it all the time?
We've been doing it all the time, and the way that the residence parking scheme works has allowed us to be very responsive to coronavirus as well. So if people if we can see that people haven't renewed, well, we can see that in data terms now, whereas previously it was all paper based. So we can either give people a nudge, we can give them some flexibility on it, we can make it more flexible. If when people were shielding, for example, we could accommodate shielding by the way we manage visitor permits. And in some areas where people weren't moving during lockdown, or maybe aren't now moving during the current lockdown, but there's space on the street. If they're in certain areas and there's carers, we've been able to give out carers permits, and people who are delivering food parcels, all of that sort of stuff we've been able to accommodate. Yeah. The benefits are huge. I do accept there's some people, we don't want them to feel that they're not available, they're not able to access the system, and we'll work with them wherever we can.
And when they come to renew a residential pass, a residence pass, I think what you've done is you've just done it over line, and you can do it online.
Yeah.
And some people have moved away from the street; they don't live here anymore, but they still renew it online.
Oh, right, okay.
Right, and then to come back and park here, and I keep telling parking services,
right,
they're not bothered about it.
No, we are beginning to mine the data that we're collecting on it, because I'll be honest with you, we've got another area in another part of the city where someone's moved away from the street, they're getting permits and they're selling them to people. And so we are beginning to action some fraud as we're beginning to see the data on these things. No, we are definitely interested, because the scheme is for the residents and for the residents of those streets or groups of streets. So we're definitely starting to move on the data side of that, and it's becoming more intelligent. The more people that join the scheme, the more data we collect, the more intelligent it's becoming, and the more intelligent the system provider is becoming in allowing us access to more and more detailed reports. I would like to think we'll be on to them. I will also confess, during 2020 we have been very sensitive about the way we've operated all parking and the way that we've administered PCNs and things like that. We've continued to do it. We've continued to collect debt. We've actually won a national award for debt collection for doing it sensitively, which is great. And the British Parking Association has taken all of our models of operation and basically cascaded them out across the country to their members, saying, do like Derby have done it. So we have been sensitive, so maybe we've not been as aggressive as the residents would like to see, but we are definitely interested, and we will be coming to a street near you.
Yeah, and I guess for me it's just worth adding as well that the team themselves, the first lockdown, were all redeployed. They were working with the NHS on setting up the GP hubs at the university. And continue to support the NHS in a number of those, where we're managing the flow of traffic, exactly as we said, on and off the highway, and they've been working with the vaccination centre up at the arena as well. So we will get there. The impacts of COVID have many tentacles.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Councillor McChrystal.
Yes, no questions. Just want to thanks for the presentation. All made sense. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. I'd just like to have a look at the maintenance and the running costs of the multi-stories that we have. I mean, I know through the past that we have issues with Chapel Street, and more or less the costs that are attached to having the work put right. Can we just concentrate on Chapel Street to start with?
Yeah, we can try. I don't think I've got the figures in front of me, precise ones, but we can talk about the aspects of it. What in particular with Chapel Street are you interested in?
Well, I'm going back 10, 12 years now that we was looking at repairs and just to say where we are with it, because there were some repairs that needed doing, and we're looking at reducing costs, because I was involved at that particular time with putting Derby City Gymnastics on the top floor. My old gym, we're still there, but management went over to Derby City Council. Obviously, the lift, we've got big issues with the lifts there, that are always breaking down. So those sort of costs that are attached to keeping that car park going, I see that as an expense moving forward.
Yeah, you're absolutely right to highlight it. It's a very tired building. I came to work in Derby in 1997, and I think around about 2000 it was considered to be life expired. And here we are in 2021, and we're still basically holding together a post-tensioned concrete structure which has got various weaknesses, had various repairs and interventions over the years, but it is fundamentally a very tired building. The whole of parking services, approximately to operate it, all the operating costs, all the facilities costs, equipment, technology, wages, everything, comes to a bill of just over £2 million. So it's about 2.2 million to run it, and that includes that. Within there, we have to pay rates and stuff like that as well. There's water fees, there's fire regulations, all wrapped up into that. So the fundamental maintenance figure for Chapel Street alone, I would estimate on average, because it will vary year to year depending whether we've done interventions for security, etc. I would guess on average it probably costs us, I would think, about £400,000 a year just to keep it. I would think the three multi-storey car parks together probably account for about 1.2 million of our maintenance schedule. I can tell you that staffing costs are around 600,000 by context, and then by definition the rest of it is work and operating costs on street equipment and surface level car park equipment and any surface maintenance, etc. on places like Abbey Street car park, things like that.
Do you think, Nigel, that these sort of costs that are attached to our car parks, I mean, we're looking at at all the additional car parking spaces that we've got around the city. I mean, for example, if you have a look with the assembly rooms, if we lost that, we'd be losing 400k. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah.
So that's a big reduction and quite a bit of cost involved there, isn't
There is, but again, that is another very tired building with its own unique maintenance challenges. And I think it comes back to something that Councillor Stanton mentioned in his first question, was about whether or not there's scope to look post-pandemic, and given that there's a great deal of uncertainty about it. But have we got too much car parking, or have we got car parks that are in the wrong place for what the city's going to look like or offer in the future? And we had a parking study done back in 2014, which was already beginning to identify that we had spaces in the wrong parts of the city. We had too much space in parts of the city where it was massively underutilized. I think that's an interesting trend that we're continuing to track. Parking's interesting for the city centre. If we really focused on commuter parking, which would have its own transport and climate change challenges, etc., and go against some of the incentives on active travel or public transport. So I'm not suggesting we did it, but the studies around the country show that you can almost grow commuter parking, not entirely limitless. It will have a limit somewhere, but you can continue to grow it and grow it and grow it. It's the elements of parking that are associated with an attractive city centre that, to be honest, across the country in lots of places have been in decline over a number of years as city centres and retail has changed and use of the internet's changed, etc. Unless you're a place that's got a really good really strong cultural and leisure offer. And that's why I mentioned York before, because even if there were no shops, people would go there, because it's got other things going on. But unless you're in one of those places, people have seen the decline. So areas around Abbey Street, for example, there is definitely scope to look at those as redevelopment. Along the line of the ring road, they could be redevelopment. Our multi-storey car parks are getting to an age where there's going to have to be a decision made, probably over the next 5 years, definitely over the next 10 years. Do we invest many millions of pounds in them, which could be knocking them down and rebuilding them, or does the council actually take a different view of parking capacity and transport? And we're proceeding some of this with Transforming Cities Fund and looking at the development of mass transit systems and stuff. Because, the amount of money the council would have to put into those car parks and the rate of return, it doesn't really make that much business sense. And we're seeing private sector parking working this out as well. And definitely within the COVID context, we are beginning to see private sector parking companies who are shutting their car parks and looking for redevelopment.
Yeah. Well said that, Nigel. That's all what we're trying to point out anyway. Again, that's probably part of our recovery plan moving forward. There's a lot going on at the moment, and we're quite, as you said, we're very unsure of where we are at the moment with things. But I personally do think that there's going to be, certainly with the age of our buildings that we've got, it's going to be a challenge moving ahead. But thank you for that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, very interesting. And by the way, the My Permit, is that just I haven't used it, but I don't know, is it what, credit card, touch and go or stuff like that?
You download an app to your mobile phone, and basically you register your preferred payment method, so your card or whatever, and you just tap on it and pay by your phone when you park. And we are looking to expand that into the multi-storey car parks as a way of reducing the cost of some of the equipment we currently have there. But yeah, and if you're away from your car, you get an alert 10 minutes before it would run out, so you can actually top it up without going back to your car. Okay.
One note of caution and experience: technology tends to break down.
It's been really reliable. The My Permit company provide a call centre backup as well, but it seems to be really easy to use, really reliable. Just to go, easiest way to demonstrate it is on the system for booking the permits at the household waste site. I think last time I saw it, there was something like 20,000 people who'd booked, and 98.1% of them had done it themselves automatically without needing the help from the call centre.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Much appreciated.
Okay.
Thank you, Werner. Right. Any more questions for Nigel or Werner? If not, we can move on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item 7, please. Impact of COVID-19 on registration services for Derby.
Good evening, Chair. It's Bernard Fenton.
Hello, Bernard.
How are you, Chair?
I'm not too bad, sir. How are you?
Yes, not too bad at all.
Thank you.
The paper that I'd like to present to you, Chair, and to this scrutiny board is very much focused on the impact of COVID on the registration services in Derby. Perhaps, Chair, if I may, I'd like to talk about what the registration services actually is made up of, so we've got a better context to understand where those impacts have been felt. Yeah. The registration services deliver statutory and non-statutory services. And so it's a combination. The statutory services, we are regulated by the General Register Office, Chair, which is a department within the Home Office. So we are expected to follow a highly legislated approach. And the sort of statutory services we're talking about now are the registration of births, deaths and marriages. There are national targets in place that, or in ordinary circumstances, Chair, we would be expected to meet. Mm-hmm. The non-statutory elements, the discretionary services, are activities that are essentially around ceremonies, and in particular wedding ceremonies and civil partnerships. There is a regulatory component to those, in the sense that we have to have attendance at, but we have to have an officer there to ensure that the appropriate registration takes place. But we are not. We follow demand, if you see what I'm saying, Chair, for both wedding and civil ceremonies. And I think it's fair to say that I'll go through the detail of the report shortly, Chair. The impact of COVID has been felt in both the statutory and non-statutory, but in the statutory service, it's been about reorganising resources to meet an increase in demand. But the financial impact of COVID has been felt very much in the discretionary ceremonies part of the service. And I hope that helps to position what the registration service is, and the fact that it's a mix of discretionary and statutory services. What I'd like to do, Chair, if that's okay, is continue to the body of the report.
Yes, Bernard, thank you. That would be fine. Yeah. Got you in front of me.
So, when national lockdown was introduced in March last year, the statutory component, government issued instructions to each registration service, and in England and in Wales, specifically introducing some restrictions. Certainly, birth registrations were stopped in March. Legislation was introduced to allow the registrations of deaths to be completed remotely, primarily over the telephone. Of course, this was to reflect the increase in demand. Unfortunately, more deaths were being registered, but also to keep communities and residents safe by not having to make the journey into a central registration office. So legislation was passed to allow us to process death registrations over the telephone. And importantly, marriage and civil partnership ceremonies were stopped at this point. In July, certain restrictions for weddings and civil partnerships were eased. Clearly, attendance was reduced to much smaller numbers, and we were able to deliver 147 wedding and civil partnership ceremonies in that period. And that is a combination of attending other venues across the city and helping and conducting the ceremonies, or holding our own, or holding those wedding and civil partnership ceremonies in Royal Oak House, where we would get the income from hiring the venue as well as the fee for conducting the ceremony. And at the point of writing this report, Chair, ceremonies were halted again for a short time in November, and we're back in a position today, well, as of last week, where ceremonies are essentially on hold. As a result of these restrictions, I think the key point to raise here is confidence and general uncertainty with couples, because, you know, ceremonies of this nature, Chair, are important events in people's lives, and many have decided to either cancel ceremonies or postpone them to a future date. On several occasions, Chair, as I'm sure you can imagine, these ceremonies have been postponed a number of times, as there's been quite a bit of doubt about when we will emerge from this current situation. And it's that, Chair, that has had the significant impact on the income generated by the registration services. So I'd like to direct you, if I may, to 4.2 in the paper. We've compared the volume of ceremony activity this year to last year, and the income that generated last year to this year, to identify where the income loss has come from. That's the methodology we've approached. And as you can see in the table, as of November, the 30th of November, this has resulted in a loss of wedding and civil ceremony income of £112,000, which represents a 72.5% reduction on the levels of income in 2019-20. The ceremonies are very much demand driven. We are not the only organisation suffering this across the city. And it's interesting that one of the common themes is looking forward to post-COVID restrictions. It will be interesting to see when confidence returns, so that people feel I think one or two couples, and well, more than one or two actually, have got very frustrated with the on-off approach of this very important event in their life. As you can see from the table, notice of marriage fees represents £22,000 of that projected loss, with the advance marriage fees, which is the money we take in advance. That's after the notice of marriage has been has been licensed, and reducing by 89,000. So it's £112,000 reduction from ceremonies. Clearly, we had to make a smaller adjustment because to put a marriage in place, Chair, we need to put a notice of marriage notification up, which lasts for 12 months at a cost of £35. Some couples have chosen either once or twice to postpone their weddings, and that's taken them beyond the validation, the period that the notice of marriage certificate lasts for. So council took the decision to waive the notice of marriage fees in these circumstances, and therefore that's a further cost of 3k. COVID-19 restrictions has also had a smaller impact on the income generated from the production and issuing of certificates, and importantly copy certificates. We get income on a much smaller level from people having copy certificates for a variety of different reasons, and lower demand has clearly just impacted on the production of these. And as you can see in 4.4, Chair, that's resulted in a loss of income of 6.5k. So as of the 30th of November, comparing that period to the previous year, the total loss of income in the registration service is 121.3k, a 62% reduction. As previous speaker had said around the parking services, when you extrapolate that and apply it to a full year effect, a 62% reduction in income in this area would result in a potential full year loss in income of 185k. So it's primarily from the non-statutory services where demand is driven, and we're not getting the opportunity to carry out those ceremonies. The report recommends that, because this is directly as a result of the restrictions and measures that have been put in place that we are expected and have to follow, we expect to fund the loss of this income from the COVID Emergency Fund. I wanted to just suggest that at the moment, Chair, the registration service is understandably focusing on prioritising its resource to do the statutory registrations, and in particular the death registrations, which are by law need to be done within 5 days, and for other practical reasons, the registering of deaths and burials, etc., is clearly high profile, and we need to make sure we prioritise and don't put any delays into those processes. So we're prioritising staff in that area. The difference this time, Chair, in this lockdown is that birth registrations have not been stopped, but we are clearly going to be deprioritising those because we have 42 days to do those, and they're less impactful. But we do make sure that if there are very specific circumstances, such as travel as it was more recently, but not at the moment, we will process birth registrations by exception as quickly as we can. And in terms of beyond that, Chair, I think it's fair to say we are interested in how confidence returns to that ceremonies market, and it's important for me to point out that we do get income from attending those ceremonies, but we're actually in competition with other venues across the city for the hiring of venues. So I wanted to, Chair, if that's okay, summarise by saying there is a significant loss to that service, felt by that service because of the COVID restrictions, that we are prioritising the statutory work, and that we are very aware, acutely aware, of being in a position where we need to be prepared for when confidence actually returns to the demand-driven ceremony market. And that concludes my presentation, Chair. If there are any questions, I'd be delighted to take them.
Yes, thank you very much. Just a quick one. We have moved all the services to the council house now, haven't we? They don't go over to Oak House?
One thing that we did at the beginning of COVID, and it's an interesting point that you raise, at the beginning of the first lockdown, we actually centralised the registration services in Royal Oak House.
Right.
Because that gave us one venue to manage and not three. And in managing that venue, we were able to work with our FM colleagues to ensure that we met all of the COVID restrictions for when that Royal Oak House opened in July for a period of time. It was a practical step to ensure safety, and we didn't have. I mean, the other aspect here, Chair, is that we had an office in Royal Derby Hospital in the bereavement suite, and then clearly they had some pressures to use that for other things. So it was an opportunity for us to bring the services all back together in Royal Oak House.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back to anybody else wants to has any questions for?
Just one from me, Chair, and I may have missed it. Where are we on the backlog and the delay on the registering of births? Because I know it was all relaxed in terms of time that you've got in order to register a birth, but are we back up to? Are we in a position where we can cope with the backlog should that change go back and you have to register it within however long it is? I think it's a number of weeks.
Thank you, Councillor Stanton. One of the disadvantages that was felt with the instruction in the first lockdown to stop taking birth registrations is that it created a significant backlog of birth registrations which needed to be addressed when that reopened in July, end of July. We had a backlog to work with, as well as the birth registrations that came through. A significant backlog, actually. So what we did, Councillor Stanton, was to make sure that we had a plan in place where we were maximising the resource we've got available to us within the service, offering overtime, moving people in to take on some of the administrative tasks, as well as taking advantage of a relationship that we've got with Derbyshire County Council, where they take on some of our work and do that for us. We will have caught up with that backlog at the end of February, but we are also making sure that whilst we've been managing the backlog, we have been dealing with new birth registrations within the 42 days that we are allowed to do that. So we've had to do both, and it's not been easy, I have got to say. And we are very similar, as you would expect, to certainly every local registration service within the East Midlands. We will have finished it by the end of February, probably in enough time to catch up and start again with all the other backlog that's going to be created, because there is talk of birth registrations being stopped again. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Yeah, it does. Thank you, Ben. And just so my son was actually one of that backlog, and when we eventually did get to register him, my wife was very impressed with the restrictions in place to make sure it was a safe experience. So that was to commend the team on that. Fantastic.
Thank you very much for the feedback. I'll absolutely pass it on, because the registration service is a very small team. It's 8 staff, and they've not closed throughout all of this period of time since last March. Services remained open, and some of the activities, certainly the death registration, are difficult if it's relentless. So they will very much welcome your feedback, Councillor Stanton.
Thank you. Councillor Pegg?
No questions, thanks, Chair.
Councillor Nawaz?
Yeah, just a quick couple of points. First of all, I would like to congratulate you, you're doing a great job, because we've had so many deaths in our community, and the death certificate's been there straight away, not a problem at all. Even if we went to the Royal Hospital or you went to the council house, it was really good. That's really, really good. Even from the community, we've not had no complaints or anything like that. The second point is, the births. If somebody needs a birth certificate emergency, they need to go away, they need to make a British passport, they can't get into the council house. They can't get to it.
What would be, we will deal with it, I referred to these earlier, Councillor, now as those exceptions that we have been conducting throughout the period since March. By far the easiest way is to forward details to me at my email address, and we will ensure that we can conduct that birth registration.
I had a case come to me before Christmas, and they were sort of complaining about this, that they need to go away straight after Christmas, and they can't get the passport on because of the birth certificate. So,
yeah, as I say, Councillor, if you get those details to me, I will ensure that those circumstances are dealt with, should that happen again, as an exceptional circumstance.
Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Nawaz. Councillor Crystal?
No, all good, thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Bernard, yeah, I mean, we know where we're standing with the hospitality sector and so forth, and wedding ceremonies has completely decimated everything that's happening around, and not to forget the supply chain as well, the caterers and everything. So, I don't know how these people are coping, but I am aware of a lot of grants have been paid forward to them just to keep them ticking over. But you know what? I think other than that, we have no choice but to wait and see when times get better, really.
I do think you touch on a point that when we do get back to more normal circumstances, I think the competition the venues may well have changed their configuration.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much for that, Bernard. Any more questions for Bernard? If not, thank you very much, Bernard. You're free to leave if you want
Thank you, Chair.
to get on with the evening, and keep yourself safe.
Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Right. Item 8, work programme 2021 municipal year. I've got one up. Dominic, just looking at the work programme, we're going to need. Go on.
I'm just getting up now. So for the meeting on the 11th of March, we've only got one item down at the moment. It's the Gender Representation Task Group report. So a member of the Gender Representation Task Group will be coming to present that. And then if there's any other items that yourself, Chair, or any of the other members would like to be on that agenda, then if you let me know between now and then, I'll contact the officers and we'll get that on the agenda.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Dominic. If any members have got any other programmes they want to put onto the work programme, any items, please let myself or Dominic know. I'd rather if it done sooner than later. If we can give you sort of a week on that. I mean, I'll go through the list as well just to check, see what if we need to add anything on there or not. I'll give it a week for members to get back to me.
Thanks.
Yeah. So okay, members.
Yes, that's fine.
Yes.
Right. Please have a look through it with it. Give it a week, and then I'll have to. I'll get together with Dominic and have a look at where we need to close things off and tidy up for the end of the year, so we can look for another programme for the following year. We can leave members to do. Okay, thank you very much. Item 9. Updates on operations of core buildings throughout the pandemic and asset disposal programme. Dominic, is that?
It's Steve Kaplan for this report, Chair.
Steve, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Chair, and councillors, as well as colleagues and any members of the public should be watching this evening. So good evening to you all. My name is Stephen Kaplan. I'm the Director of Property Services at Derby City Council. So, Chair, you have requested 2 items from myself, being an update on the core property assets operation during the pandemic, which I think it's immediately obvious to state the pandemic is not over and we're very much still in the thick of it, arguably even more so than before. And I think that's actually quite an important point I wish to put out at the start. And the second element you have requested is an update on the disposal programme. The disposal programme we have presented as a PowerPoint, which I have requested goes into the private section, which I apologise to members of the public and anybody else that should be watching, because it will include potentially commercially sensitive information. Some items will still be subject to council approvals, and when you're talking about properties and values, it's not always best to fully disclose things at such an early stage in the procedure. So for that reason, we have requested that the second element of the paper goes into private section with respect and acknowledgement. So, core assets. We don't really define property assets as core assets per se. We may think of them in that way, but they don't actually get a definition of that. So for the purpose of this, I took the liberty of discussing it with my colleagues, obviously, and grouping them into a number of operational sections, if you like. So the first one is what we might call the citywide operational buildings, which perhaps is what you may have been thinking as the core buildings, and that's predominantly the council house, Ked Road, Rycote, Stores Road, those kind of buildings. The second group I would group as public service buildings, and that would definitely include Royal Oak House, which you've just heard about, and the COVID secure measures that are in place there were done by my team. Other buildings would include the connections buildings, all our libraries, leisure facilities, and I would include our parks and public toilets, the Connect buildings, which is our business centres, members will be familiar with, and of course our market hall. Then I grouped together all our schools and education as a separate cohort of properties. Many of those are not really directly managed by the council because they will be under the jurisdiction of the school governors and the operational boards. And of course, there are many schools that are academies or potentially free or faith schools. But so I'm really considering the local authority directly run schools. And then the fourth final element were people's services, particularly where we have residents or day operations, and colleagues will be aware of the Arboretum and Perth House, Rosewood, and the children's homes. So that's how I grouped them. And if you will recall and cast your minds back, the lockdown number 1 started on the 23rd of March. I won't forget the date because it was my birthday and I had the day off work to go and play golf, which clearly I did not do. The first lockdown actually fully ended on the 4th of July, which slightly bizarrely happens to be my mother's birthday. So 2 dates I will be able to bookend, no doubt, for forever. There have, of course, been introduced tiers, and at the time of drafting this paper, we were in lockdown 2, and obviously we are now in lockdown 3. What has clearly evolved and been substantially different is at the first lockdown, there were no rule books to follow for buildings. There was no guidance per se. There was no COVID secure. All of that had to come afterwards. And we rapidly put together a team to make sure we made all our buildings and services COVID secure. And we then set up a group actually called Unlocking the Lockdown. And I chaired that group, and it was a cross-party group of colleagues from all walks of the authority, including equalities impact, health and safety, so a very broad spectrum to make sure we were fully inclusive, and also governance as well. And in doing that, we went through building by building based on the service needs. It was really important that we focus on the service demand rather than just the buildings. And that's an important nuance because some things can be provided in a different way. So click and collect, for instance, and our libraries is actually quite a good example that they are now still open in lockdown 3, even though generally, we wouldn't be encouraging people to come there. However, by keeping the ICT facilities, access to computers and data for the public who have maybe limited access and need that, and also the click and collect service for books, which is clearly really important for education, well-being, and one of the good things you can do in lockdown is clearly read a lot, and I certainly have embraced that. So we adjusted the buildings to meet the requirements of the services. We also had to focus very much on PPE and making those kind of arrangements. So there was a PPE task group. In fact, one of my heads of service became the SPOC, the single person of contact for all PPA. That's Jane Sowerby-Warrington, who you'll probably be aware. So she was reallocated into that role. In paragraph 4.5, I'm pretty sure members will be interested to know the cost of the COVID secure requirements, and I've put a round figure in there of 110,000. We do have the exact figure. I'm not being flippant. I think it was 109,335 and 36p. But of course, it moves every day at the moment because we are not out of the situation. And the costs of that include things like perspex screening, carpet arrows, the signage about distancing, hand sanitizers, and we did buy some face coverings for staff that were required to go into sites. So trading standards, for instance, still need to go into an environment. They need to be protected in their function to do that, and we've supported that through facilities management, which you'll appreciate reports into my direct service. So we've got the council house and all these key properties back. There have been lots of communication and guidance on our intranet, and as well as making that publicly available to people that might have to visit the council house, so they can now come in the front, for instance, and staff really must not come in the front. So we try to make it safe for visitors and one-way traffic and that kind of thing. We were probably a little bit ahead of the game in that we didn't stipulate the 2 metre rule. We basically said keep the distance according to the regulations, because as we know, that then shortened to 1 plus protective measures. And obviously, you probably heard in last week there were rumours of a 3 metre rule coming in. So we were quite shrewd in trying not to say a definitive distance, just keep your distance, whatever the guidance says, and that way we haven't had to reprint loads of signage, for instance. There have been a few outbreaks, as you'll have known. Arboretum House has had a serious outbreak of COVID cases, and the fact is, it is not because the buildings have not been COVID secure, it's because human error, frankly, in not following the absolute recommendations of simple things like wiping down a door handle or wiping it down a telephone. So one person answers the telephone and then hands it over to someone else. And that is how the virus can be transmitted very, very easily. Really simple things like that. And we have put lots of additional cleaning measures in place. So in a nutshell, that's how we have grouped the properties, managed the response to the lockdowns and the COVID requirements to make them COVID secure. We've supported education. We've had our health and safety teams go out. I mean, if it helps most, there is a process in the unlocking the lockdown, shall we say, and that is that you can't just unlock. You had to have your QR reader. Some of you will have noticed lots of buildings. We distributed those. We had to have the measures signed off by the COVID board to make sure those were in place. We had risk assessments done. We had additional risk assessments for our staff and even particular elements of our staff. So our BAME colleagues who have been more prevalent to infection. We've made special arrangements to support them wherever is absolutely needed or appropriate. And we've made signage and advertising and so forth to make sure all of those protective measures are in place. And of course, we have complied with the regulations and shut buildings where necessary. So our leisure facilities are all now closed again. And I guess that chair is hopefully a succinct fly through of where we're at and how we have responded and the cost associated with putting those measures in place. I've been assisted in this paper with my heads of service, but I've not brought them along this evening, so I will happily try to field any questions, but I might have to refer and come back to you, to which I apologise. I should also apologise if there's any problem with my optics this evening. I'm in a very dark room, and if I put the central light on, it's like I've got a halo and you'd wonder what you were seeing. So I put a couple of side lights, so I apologise if the optics aren't great, but it is middle of dark January. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Optics are fine. We can hear you and see you. That's what's important. Right, I'll take it straight forward to the members. Councillor Pegg?
Thanks, Chair. No questions really, but, well, one based around our regional house and the COVID outbreak. Are all sort of the residential homes continually monitored that the standards are, being implemented and being met, so it doesn't re-emerge in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a one-to-one literally this evening with Darren Alsabrook, who is our head of health and safety, and he reports to me, and he gave me an update, and that's how I know that the transmission is regrettably almost through human reasons, almost casualness. You don't think it's going to happen, but he assures me that these measures are all in place, and we continue to re-emphasize them, and they're all reportable now under RIDOR, so we don't hide anything. These are actually reported and recorded nationally now. COVID is a reportable incident, so the answer to your question, Councillor, is yes.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Councillor Stanton?
Yeah, just a minor one for me. So obviously the new variant of the virus is more infectious, and I guess that's a reminder to us that we're not really dealing with a steady state here. Things can change, and so I just wondering whether to congratulate you in terms of getting the measures in place in order to make the buildings generally operational and safe to do so. But are all those sort of measures that are put in place scalable to the new variant, I guess? And also, I guess, what's the level of permanency of some of these measures put in place? So I sort of think that the new normal, we may well not go back to exactly as it was before. And are there measures that we think we'll just be keeping, including probably looking at our core buildings and how we want to operate them more generally, and whether they're the right the right buildings that we've got, and whether they're serving the right purpose. But yeah, that's it. That's all from me.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, obviously, I'm not medically qualified. Well, I say obviously, there's no reason why I might not be, but I'm not. And so I'm not in a qualified position to answer your question about the new variants per se. With all due respect, your information is quite possibly the same as mine, in terms that there is no evidence to suggest that by lengthening the measures of 2 meters to 3, or etc., is any different. It's just that the variant is more transferable. So I take that to mean it sits on that telephone handle for a bit longer, and it doesn't, it can get through your skin a bit quicker, or your lungs, or wherever it goes. So I don't think any of the measures that we have in place would be any more effective, because we've got a very rigorous cleaning regime. We're using all the the appropriate chemicals that have got lots of alcohol in them, which is the key component. I think you need something like 65% alcohol in anti-sanitizers. We're calling out people if we see them in the building that aren't adhering to the 2 meter rule and things like that, and trying, nobody should be shaking hands and so forth. So I believe the measures we have in place, based on the information currently available, is that there is no difference in the new variants, because there are various ones, aren't they, that we've now hearing about. And the second element to your question, I think, is a really good question as well, in terms of what does the future hold. And again, I kind of don't know. If we're all vaccinated, does that mean some of these measures can be relaxed? I would like to think one-way systems and 2 meter distancings will go, but I think we could well be looking at perspex screens in reception areas and things like that as a good, sensible precaution anyway, because we have lots of flu. People die, 500,000 people, 500,000 people die annually of flu, and not in the UK, globally, I think. And so, having perspex screens, to me, doesn't seem like a bad measure in public facing buildings, although one could feel that drops out some of the personal contact. I think the simple answer, unfortunately, is we will have to wait and see what the world looks like as we come out of the pandemic. I'm sorry, I can't really give you a definitive answer. I wish I could.
No, I didn't really expect it, Steve, but thanks for your responses.
Thank you for that, Councillor Stanton. I'll save mine till the second part of the meeting on that. It was 19,500 people that passed away with flu in 2019 in the UK.
Was it? Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for that. We can go to the second part of the meeting now, if you want.
Sorry, Chair, I just need to read out the exclusion of the press and public for you to pass first. So it's to consider a resolution to exclude the press and public during consideration of the following item, and that under Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during discussion of the following item on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of Part 1 of Schedule A of the Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information.
Yes, that's okay. Thank you very much for that, Dominic.
So, sorry, just if the councillors could just confirm that they're happy to pass that?
Yes, I'm happy.
Thrilled.
Thank you. So the public broadcast will